It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out this video. Wow, well, this video is going to be a multi-part video in the sense that I'm talking about and looking at a couple of different things all in one board. It's not going to be split into multiple parts, but I'm going to be looking at a couple of things. So, before I switch over to the desktop, this project started a very long time ago, and it was a custom keyboard called the ML-104. And ML stands for the initials of the person who actually commissioned this particular custom keyboard. And what a ride it has been. An absolute roller coaster of events in getting this board to its final completion state, which is what we are going to be having a look at today. So I've just got a cover on it because I feel like it deserves at least some kind of unveiling. This is just like a little bit of a cover that I sewed together a very long time ago. And so without further ado, here is the completed ML-104. Ta-da! So it's a full-size keyboard in a large enter format. I believe it's not exactly an ISO because it doesn't have the sort of short shift here with the extra key, and it's just basically replacing the / pipe key up here with the standard ANSI enter with the large enter. Now, so just in very quick terms, this keyboard was commissioned by ML themselves, but it was actually designed by somebody for the case and somebody separately for the PCB. And the components for that were sent to me direct from the people who designed and had them manufactured. Some of the issues that we hit in getting this keyboard together was that the PCB cutout for the bottom half of the case did not enable screw-in stabilizers because the clearance for the actual screws contacted the sides of the case cutout on the bottom. So a new case bottom had to be made. There was a little bit of quality control issues with the factory that had manufactured the actual case, and so a new case top had to be sent. And then the actual plate had to be modified because for some reason the actual size of the slots for the space bar were too small and they wouldn't fit over the top of the space bar stabilizer housings, and that caused an issue. Moving from the case to the PCB, so the original design, and I say the original design intent, was that this would have hot swaps on it. However, a little bit of information had been lacking and it hadn't been fully researched and realized, but the Zeal V2s did not fit the Milmax hot swap sockets that had been purchased for it. So then they had to go and order new hot swap sockets. So then we put them in, but we found that they were very loose in the actual PCB. Now, talking with Zeal about this, he had recommended that I run a hot iron just very briefly on the sockets to reflow the solder on the solder mask to help get that contact and hold them in, and they were a friction fit socket. And in theory, when you put the actual switch into it, they flare open and they maintain a good electrical contact. And of course, when you pull them out, in theory, as the legs are being retracted, it should sort of just close up and, come out. Well, the sockets came in, we put them on, and they were extremely loose. Extremely loose to the PCB holes. I tried to reflow them to make them stick, and they wouldn't stick. They wouldn't at all. To the point where snapping a switch in would cause sockets in the actual PCB pinholes to Mexican jumping bean out and then fall between and cause me no end of frustration because then I'd have to pull bits apart to actually get underneath and get out these sockets. But in the end, I managed to fit all the sockets in, I managed to get all the switches in, and then we found that it was not electrically sound. The continuity of switches was that you would press one and it wouldn't really produce signal. It wouldn't actually give you the key output. But then if you pressed it a lot harder or gave it a bit of a wiggle, it would. So it meant that when it was flaring out, it wasn't actually providing sufficient contact to the solder mask on the actual pad for that switch, which in itself was quite disappointing. So that was that part. When we were pulling keycaps off and we were pulling switches out, the entire pins and sockets were coming out with it. So there were switches that basically had both pins on it and they weren't staying in the PCB either. So that was another issue because, well, they've been flared out, which meant when you try and put it back in the hole, they weren't fitting the hole. So they were kind of like scraping and then popping. So then it wouldn't fit and then you'd have to pull them off. So they would go slightly in and then you could fit them back in again. It was all sorts of lots of time required. Now, some design considerations was that the LEDs originally, when they sat flush on the PCB, were quite far down. And what that meant was the light coming through from the LEDs for the num, caps lock, and scroll lock was very faint. Now, for me, that's not really too much of an issue, but it just meant if you were sitting further back, it was very, very hard to see until you got a bit closer because the thickness of the case is quite thick. There's quite a lot of that depth channel that it had to get through. Like, it doesn't go all the way down, of course, but there was a good, couple of mil that light had to travel, and so it was quite faint. The solution to that was, in the end, I actually had to elevate the LEDs to be flush against the bottom of the case. And how I did that was essentially when I was building it, I didn't solder in the LEDs. I left them loose in place, had the keyboard upside down, and then rested them so that it was against the actual case top. Then I soldered them in. And that way the LEDs are at the maximum height possible to produce the shortest path for the light to come through. There were some other quality issues that we encountered along the way where the factory that produced this were, I would say, very poor with their customer relationships. And what I meant by that was there was physical damage marks to the case. There was gouges, there was like very deep scratches and effectively deformed metal. They had also stripped one of the threads for the actual case screws. The factory denied that it was their fault, and they said it must have been damaged during shipping. However, I had photographic evidence from it was shipped to me from the factory, okay, direct. They DHL'd it to me, that the packaging was perfect. They'd wrapped it in tissue paper and in foam and in, a box. None of that had any damage whatsoever. So, if the quality control from manufacturing said there was no problems, then the damage would have been probably during packing, transportation, and shipping before it actually left to come to me. That factory, I can tell you right now, sucks. I'm not going to mention their name, but for those who are involved in the project, well, they're definitely not a favored factory at the moment because of that particular customer response. So, with all of those kind of issues aside, we finally got there in the end because a decision was made to basically not go down that hot swap path. You can't use standard Mil-Max because the Zeal V2 switches don't fit in those Mil-Max switches. So in the end, we just went straight with a standard soldered board, which is what's happened here. We did encounter a bit of a programming issue, but a bit of discussion with the person who designed and flashed the PCB fixed that because this menu key wasn't actually functioning. And I had suspected that it could have been a function key or a layer key, except it's a full-size keyboard. So what exactly are you going to be using a function key or layer key for? And I had tested it by holding it down and trying the different outputs and nothing was happening. So I thought it was electrically, there was an issue with the actual PCB itself. Multimeter, testing, everything else, checking it out, I couldn't identify any faults with it whatsoever. I spoke with the manufacturer designer of the PCB, not the factory, but the actual designer of the PCB. They sent me the schematic, they sent me the matrix, they sent me the KeyCap files, and we were both looking at going, it doesn't make sense. Everything is fine, it should work. And then we dug a little bit deeper on the actual mapping of it, and then that's when we went, oh, it is actually mapped, but as a momentary layer key, not a function key. And then it triggered the PCB designer, and they remembered why they'd mapped it as a momentary layer. And it's because you'll notice this is a fully enclosed board. It weighs a lot. I don't have my scales with me, but it is solid aluminium, right? This thing, like, you could take it into a zombie apocalypse and you would be perfectly fine as a handheld weapon. There's no way to reflash this unless if you break it open. And so they had done the design with menu escape as a soft reset to get into the bootloader so you could reflash a layout. Wow. Well, once we figured that out, I was able to actually check that and test that. I plugged it in, had QMK, toolbox open, and it did exactly what it should have done. So all hunky-dory. And in the end, I was able to complete this build. Now, this build has been 4 months practically in the making because of all these back and forth issues. Buying parts, getting factory stuff made, getting it shipped over, buying other parts, getting it sent over, having debates with factories, getting stuff sent over, putting it together, taking it apart, testing it, putting it back together. It's been a very challenging time because fitting this around family, work, other keyboards that I've been working on, other projects and reviews that I've been doing, I'm so glad that this is finished. Now, what's really cool and interesting about this is that I have a key upside down, and this is really opportunistic for me because I just realized looking at it, is this is also a key set that I have never actually used before or played with, and it's, I believe, the Dev TTY. Now, it's not rocking, there's no feet, it's just because I've got cables and stuff under this mat, and it's just playing a little bit havoc there. And in terms of a profile, it's very similar to a SA kind of sculpted feel, but it's a lot deeper in the dish and concaveness about it. And putting my fingers on it, except for this one that's off because it's upside down, it's really lovely. I love how it just hugs the fingers. It's very pleasant. The profile and the sculpt on that, it looks really good. It looks really clean. I hadn't really thought about getting a close-up on it, but the print is really, really sharp without looking at it in super close-up detail. Now, of course, I do have my loop here, so I can have a look at it in a moment. I don't know if I can do that with the camera, but let's just have a look at what it looks like on the underside. And what we're going to see here is that it is thick. It'll focus. Oh, it wants to focus on the keyboard underneath. There we go. So it's quite thick and it's very strong. It's very solid. Now, I'm not sure if, I'm pretty sure that's got to be die-sub PBT here, since it's not double shot for ABS. But if I take the ruler out and I check it, we're talking a good solid 1.5 mil keycap wall there, as you would expect by seeing how thick that is. So that's really, really great. And if that printing is very sharp. It's very nice indeed. Now let's see if I can get the upper camera. So the focus isn't probably great because but you can see that, with the circles, with the dots there, for what it is under the magnification, and me not able to holding it up very straight, I would be super happy with that printing. Okay, so let's get that on the right way. So the final owner of this keyboard, ML, you know, obviously this video will come out at some point a lot later than when you already have it, and the feedback I hope should be that this keyboard is performing beautifully. Let's do a typing sound sample of this. So these are Zeal V2 switches in a custom aluminium keyboard with Dev TTY PBT keycaps, thick keycaps. So the thing with these is it's got a really great depth and resonance to them. If they had a harder sort of click to them, it would almost be like solenoid keyboards. You know, they don't quite match, say, like a buckling spring, but even though they're tactile switches, like right now I'm sure I'm actuating, but I'm not bottoming out. But with the bottom out, the echo and depth of sound to it is lovely. I actually really like how this sounds. Now, ML had originally taken this back to sort of play with it while we were waiting for some things to happen, and then brought it back to me to complete and troubleshoot, and said that it rang like bells. And I think that's really more of the stabilizers and the sort of the spring ping in the Zeals, because it's very hard surfaced across all of this, and it's a very rigid case, so any of the higher frequencies are bouncing around and echoing in there. Personally, I actually have no problems with that. I quite like it, and it's probably not as noticeable because it's sitting on this desk mat, which is going to absorb a bit of that. Noting that on the bottom here, there is no rubber at all. There are no feet. There are no standoffs. It's just a straight up metal, and it's heavy duty. So there you go. Now, just to complete this review, the LEDs I want to show, okay, because you know, just to indicate that it does actually work. Okay, so you can see that well, they're bright enough that even with the room light and the camera going, you can actually see them glowing now. And I can lean back quite a bit from it, and it's actually straight up noticeable. Now, if I actually turn the room light off, you can see they've just got a nice sort of pin depth to them. And they're not too obnoxious at all. So I think it turned out really, really well. Plus, them being orange, it's not as obnoxious as a pure white or a really bright blue, kind of like, you know, a car driving behind you with those super white and blue lights. That should be bloody illegal. So there you have it. There is the ML-104 custom mechanical keyboard with Zeal V2s and Dev TTY. I can't wait to put this in the box and get it back home to where it needs to be, because as much fun as it was, and I've spent a lot of time and effort on this, I want it to go home, I want it to be enjoyed, and I don't want to have to deal with those Zeal hot swap sockets for a very long time, if not ever again. Now, if you like seeing this and you like hearing about the issues that I've had, then, you know, please hit that like button. Please hit that share button if there's anybody that you know who is interested in getting a custom keyboard made or a custom keyboard put together and reviewed. You know, I'm more than happy to help out and troubleshoot and things like that if we encounter any issues. And of course, yeah, if you like this kind of content and you're not subscribed, I would love and appreciate that subscribe button being pressed as well. So thank you very much for checking out the video. And of course, as usual, until next time, happy clacking.